Good evening, everyone. My name's Connor from Live. I think we'll make a start now. There's about 11 of you on the call at the minute. So I think we'll make a start, and anyone else that joins can catch up or watch it back on our website. So as you may know me, I'm the Building Safety Manager at Live Group. I also currently retain management of our lead stock schemes, which is Cartier House, forms part of that instruction. So ultimately, I'm responsible for day-to-day on site, as well as the actual cladding projects within the scheme. So we wanted to have this opportunity to be able to present a bit of information to you guys. I understand that information feels quite far and few between, especially with the newsletters not giving too much of an update, and it's quite hard to share certain aspects of what's going on with the cladding project through doing newsletters. So before we start, just a few general questions that get asked of us. This session is recorded automatically. It will be posted on our website and it will be shared in the upcoming newsletter for anyone that's not been able to make it. We've done these sessions before. We'll continue to do them throughout the project. I do apologise to anyone that had made plans to watch this session last night. As we stated in our newsletter, we delayed it 24 hours because of an upcoming meeting, something that I'll share a little bit of information on very shortly. In terms of questions, at the end of the session, we'll close the PowerPoint down. There's not many slides on there anyway. We'll have an opportunity where you can email into buildingsafety@live-group.co.uk. That'll come through to me and I'll be able to answer your questions. We just actually put Cartier live at the start to make it very quick for me when I'm looking through them questions. The session's not intended to be that long, 30-40 minutes, but we have limited it to 60 just in case there is a mass influx of questions around the information that we're sharing. We'll answer as many as we can. I'll give you the best answers that I've got. Can't always promise that I'm going to be able to answer everything as much as I'd like to. These projects are very complex in their own nature, and it is often quite difficult to have every answer in front of me. So what I wanted to start with is the actual operation on site and how it would look for those that live within the building and for your residents, tenants, and for some of you yourselves who are owner-occupiers, as I'm aware of. So in terms of day-to-day site, this is how the setup is planned to be. And I'm just going to talk through how this would work for the building itself. So the building itself, as you can see, there is this blue barrier around the building, which is effectively where scaffolding and will be placed around the building. To the front of the building, there'll be a compound, as you can see, this compound here, which is this blue line. That compound will not be a permanent fixture. It will be in and out of place, depending on deliveries and also depending on what events are happening on the Royal Armoury Square or on the wider lead stock estate. So that will then mean that there'll be a lot of movement on site. There'll be a lot of deliveries to site. We don't have any localized storage on site. So everything we use in that day will be getting delivered that day. And as you can see, there's them key routes in coming around near the hotel that will provide them entry points. So in terms of the commercial units, they will have a hoarding around them that will be branded up to them commercial units. There will be access directly into the units and that will remain open, and ultimately it will cause a little bit of disruption to them units, but not too much. Now, what I should say is a lot of this plan is based on our discussions with the estate team, with the estate owners, and it is, it's fluid in the sense that it may change as we finalise them discussions. Them discussions have been going on for a while. Our legal teams are now drawing up all the paperwork to make sure everyone's happy, at which point the estate owners can issue us that license that we need to use their land to repair our building. So the contractors will be based on site constantly. There'll be a 24/7 security presence on site. We've considered how that's going to work in terms of an evacuation point of view. There'll be no change or prevented access to the building for yourself as residents. And yeah, so there'll be lots going on. There may be some areas of the building when we won't be allowing people access to balconies and that sort of stuff. But that'll be communicated as we progress. And at the minute, this is kind of just how the site's going to be set up as a whole. So taking away from that, I also know that some of you may wonder how the wider estate is going to be affected by this. So as you know, Live manage 4 buildings on site, 3 of which require remediation. That's Cartier, Mackenzie and LaSalle. So this is kind of an overview of how it's going to be. Cartier having the biggest storage area at the front, which as we've mentioned is not a permanent fixture. Along with this, we've also looked at a unit down here, which is near the Tesco Express. We're looking at renting that unit, and that's where we're going to put all our site offices and toilet facilities and welfare facilities for the teams that are going to actually be working with on these projects. The reason we've done that is because the estate team wasn't comfortable with us having porter cabins put on site and so forth, and we understand that, we respect that, and we've decided that, you know, renting a unit to manage all this project is probably the most sensible way, and it appeases people. There's also some smaller welfare areas at the further side of site, which I don't think will really affect the residents of Cartier House too much. I can't comment on, as you know, the Franklin building, which is not managed by Live, so I can't comment how that's going to affect the residents of Cartier. We have a level of dialogue with that property management firm, and but I know that Allied, who are the estate team, or Plus Management, they'll be working with that team to make sure that everyone's working fluently and together. So in terms of a timeline to complete works, in a very basic way of explaining this, once we actually submit to the BSF, there's around an 8-week period, and we're going to go into that period a little bit further on the next slide. The actual works on site are anticipated to take around 53 weeks to complete now. There'll be a 2-week period of snagging and sign off, and then roughly 2 weeks after that is when all the paperwork will be issued and the EWS1 form will be issued. So it's a very basic overview is that. It's a very quick timeline. It's not intended to be too intrusive. We'd like to give you some dates, but we'll explain a little bit further why we can't give them dates at the minute in the future. So yeah, that is the basic timeline from a very basic perspective. So Building Safety Fund and where we're up to now. So in terms of the actual steps, everyone knew we completed the pre-application, and everyone knows that we've completed the first stage of the full application. So now in terms of the second stage of application, and there are the areas there that need to be considered into that second stage. We're going to share a little bit on this in a moment, but we've got the full tender, we've got the full cost, and we're at a point where project-wise we're able to submit that stage 2, and that will then give us that funding decision and enter that grant funding agreement. Unfortunately, we're not able to yet, because there's issues in relation to the grant funding agreement between MHLGC and the freeholder. And this is because the freeholder is part of a much larger group of interested parties in this project, who are working with the freeholder, who are working with MHLGC, sorry, to finalise some amendments to that grant funding agreement. I'm not involved in them discussions. It is a very high level, and when I say they're part of a wider group, I mean that there's lots of different agents, freeholders, ARMA, and so forth that are leading them discussions away from Live and away from just this project, but it does affect being able to do that. Now, the reason we're not able to progress is part of the stage 2 final application is that when you submit that stage 2, you're agreeing to the terms of the grant funding agreement. Now, the freeholder obviously can't do that until they know what the final edition of the grant funding agreement is going to be. We was told today on a call that it potentially could be looking between 2 to 6 weeks for that to come through. I'm not sure how factual that is. It was just an off comment that was made to us by somebody who worked within this, but that, you know, there's no guarantee on that. We're just taking it day by day at the minute. Ultimately, what this means when we talk about our timeline is that we keep putting our timeline back, so that where we say that 8-week period and then that 52-week period, we keep moving our timeline until we get to the point that we're able to submit. And once we submit on that day, that's when we say, right, 8 weeks from now, we can give that date out. 52 weeks from there, we can give that date out, and so forth. So I hope that gives a little bit of explanation as to why we are where we are. So in terms of the actual stage 2 submission that we've mentioned, these are the different areas that we have to provide documentation on, and this is from the actual portal itself. So the scope of works, which we've agreed with MHLGC, provided all the necessary documentation around that, fire engineers' requirements, the contractors' requirements, the planning, the plans, and all that sort of stuff. You then have the statutory approvals. This is where we've got building control sign off, the planning permission, which on this occasion we've gone for a license to alter. Cartier's house license to alter, I think, was approved today. So we got that back. So that's all been uploaded. And as you can see, tick on that, we've provided that information and we're happy with that. The actual procurement of the project, this is where we've got to dictate to MHLGC how we complete the tender and our tender process, which was to go out and do stage 1 and stage 2, what that meant, and provide a cost assessors report on that, as well as actually providing the cost recovery options for the freeholder. For example, if there's a warranty in place, if there was a developer that they could go after, the legal elements of that, and further proving that the leaseholders would have the burden of this cost if the Building Safety Fund wasn't there. The contract execution, this is based around the grant funding agreement, providing the names, the signatures, the email addresses, the contact details of those that we sign in that grant funding agreement, as well as actually providing the details of all the contractors with the collateral warranty, who will be given warranties on the building for the work that they're conducting as the supplier at the building. After that, we give a project timeline. Now, at the minute, as we mentioned earlier, we pretty much just move that back every week, back a month, and back a month is how it feels at the moment. So we just keep that updated. We keep on updating it, just adding on every day as a day by day comes. Along with this, then you've got the key project team appointments, where we've got to give the background on the suppliers that are working on the project, as well as their accountability, their PI insurance, director details, company registration numbers, all the sort of stuff that you would expect us that we've already completed as part of our checks before appointing them to the project. Now, this is where we hit the stumbling block, as we call it, the additional documentations, which is this Schedule 9 that we've talked about, which is basically agreeing that the company is ready, the management company is ready to enter into the grant funding agreement, and the board minutes to say that there's been a board meeting to approve that. Unfortunately, as we've said, the freeholder's not able to do that until the grant funding agreement negotiations have been concluded. We did have a meeting yesterday with the solicitors acting on behalf of the freeholders, and they wasn't directly involved in these discussions, but they work for the same firm, so we was able to get a bit of background onto this and try and understand why it's taking so long. They are working as hard as they can. A lot of this at the minute, my understanding, is in the court of the government at the moment. We're not directly involved in this, like we've said. We only know as much as what we've told you guys here. I wish I could give you the full barrel of works of what's going on in them negotiations, but unfortunately I don't know that information. And then the full works and cost declaration is just a final signature by myself to say that we've checked everything, we've uploaded everything, and we're ready to submit. So that's kind of an overview of how we do the stage 2 submission and where we're actually up to. As we've said, we're at the point now where we've provided everything. We've got it as a project team. We're very happy with the content that we've provided. The only thing we've got left to do is get that final funding agreement agreed, get that Schedule 9 in, get them board minutes in, and move forward in that sense. So the actual financial position of the scheme, and I want to give some background. So these are figures as of the start of this month. They are currently under revision. We've just had a revised tender price. We are expecting it to increase. So I want to explain the difference in the two columns we've provided here. So these are the cost headings that we provide to MHLGC when we enter the application. These cost headings have various subcategories below them, and we have to provide documentation on each category. We also have to provide a cost assessors report, and then the ministry themselves actually complete a cost assessors report themselves. So in terms of Cartier House, it's actually not looking too bad in terms of the difference between the total project cost and what we've entered as a total eligible for grant funding. There's around a £40,000 difference. The £40,000 that we've been told they won't pay for at the minute is in relation to the hoardings on site and the upkeep of them throughout the project. We don't necessarily agree with that, but we've left it off for the minute, and it's going to be something that we're going to look at as a variation. So the actual cost to remove the actual all the unsafe cladding and render and so forth is around £475,000, and as we're only removing systems that have been given technical eligibility, they are, it's all included. The installation of the new cladding and render systems, as you can see, it's around £3.8 million. We've not got any non-eligible works as a requirement that we know of at the minute, so that's obviously £0. And then the prelims and the main contractor cost. Now, some of you may look at that and think, there was a newsletter a few months ago and it didn't look that high. We obviously put all the other contractors' main costs in there, scaffolding, the hacky stairs that we've mentioned, the setup of site, the staff and management cost of having people on site, security costs, all the different things that fall into that category sitting there, and obviously the machine hire and all that stuff that can fall into there sits in there. Now, the other cost is around 3.1 million. This category itself contains many things. It includes, first of all, a contingency. We've put a 10% contingency in on the whole project, just in case we get to site, we rip the cladding off, we find a problem that we weren't expecting, and the contractor says, oh, this is going to cost you, this much to repair it. We need to be able to have access to that money to be able to do that work and not hold the project up and slow things down. So we put in a contingency. It's part of the guidance that you do this anyway. On top of that, it includes the cost of the entire project team, from the project managers through to Live Group, through to all the others that have worked on this project, including the initial surveys and so forth. Also in that category is the VAT. Now, obviously, we can't claim VAT back on service charge. This is all going to go through the service charge, and therefore we're unable to reclaim that amount. So we have to include it as a client cost. So ultimately, it gives a total project cost of around 9.75 million, which is, as I say, due to be revised. We are expecting it to go up. We'll share a bit more on that once we have it. The project management team met with me for about 2 hours today, and we was going through it. We're working very closely with the contractor. The reason for these increases is materials are on the rise on a day-by-day basis. Supply and demand is getting much, much tighter. Contractors are walking away from these projects. And more importantly, the subcontractors who are key to getting these off the ground are also walking away. So unfortunately, that means that the price of these contractors does start to rise. So I hope that gives a bit of an overview. We're wanting to do a bit more on this in one of our newsletters, hopefully in the next month. We're going to do a bit more frequent newsletters over the next 2 months. One of them being sharing information from the actual cost assessors report, who has obviously been appointed by ourselves to make sure that the costs that are coming in, not only from the contractors, but the recommendations from our project managers and project team are reasonable, and that we should have faith in the information that's in front of us before submitting it. That independent cost assessor is completing that report as we speak. That's due to be provided to us, and we're hopeful to be able to share that with yourselves as the leaseholders. So I hope that gives a bit of an overview into the financial situation. As we've said, we're putting this all into the fund. At the minute, from Homes England took an initial look at this. They provided some comments, and as we say, the only amount that was kind of said, we don't think that will be funded, was around £40,000, with the rest of the work to be funded. This is obviously pending the full and final review by MHLGC, who hold the wallet and hold the ability to move that forward. So we do come to the end of the information I wanted to share. I wanted to do it verbally to try and get as much across as I can. Very much, we've still got a lot to go. I know that this information, has come across quite quickly, and that we are sharing key figures that we're going to share out in letters and let you digest that. But I hope it's come across as a bit, helpful. It gives you some reassurance that we're putting this into the fund, that we don't expect, apart from state aid deductions, we don't expect a large cost to our leaseholders at Cartier House. Obviously, that's subject to the MHLGC approval. This is based on our interpretation of the guidance and our project managers and cost assessors interpretation of the guidance. So yeah, so I think now would be a good time to answer some questions. I did say I didn't expect this to go on for a full hour, and that it may only be half an hour. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I could look at my emails and be able to view your questions. Ideally, it would have probably been easier if we'd have had people on being able to speak. So I do apologise. It's just the way that our system works. Sometimes is that it doesn't, our Zooms are kind of locked down, if that makes sense. So I'm just getting onto the inbox. As I say, I'm probably not going to be able to answer absolutely every question that you've got for me. Some of them we'll probably have to take away. We'll have your email address. Ryan has joined my team, and he will be picking up a lot of our communication points of view, which we'll move forward with, which means that we should get quicker responses, because we understand that's kind of where we understand that previously they've fallen down a little bit. So in terms of one of the questions here is, what does the freeholder propose to do? Appreciate the process is complex, but it cannot go on indefinitely. Yeah, no, I agree, and it's exactly one of the questions that I've asked of the freeholder and the legal team. I've said, you know, we're already in a position to move forward. There's a constant risk around the contractor walking away or the subcontractors walking away. We've presented them risks. Me and the project management team met. We've typed up a letter that we've sent to the freeholder. We've provided that letter just today, actually, and we wanted them to know the risk that they're taking by not moving forward at this time. And we've also asked for what their view is on them next steps. Do they continue to await these negotiations to conclude? And how long do they propose that they are prepared to wait before they say, right, no, we've just got to get on with this? So these are things that I've asked the freeholder, but I've not got much of a response on yet. Obviously, from their side of view, they're in the hands of their legal team, so they're not able to share anything until they know what their solicitors are doing. In terms of a question here is, at what stage does MHLGC review the cost to assess which are funded and which are not? That happens as soon as we submit. So all that information goes off to their cost assessor, who dictates and looks at the guidance and says yes, no, yes, no. So that'll happen over that 8-week period. Around 4 weeks into that 8-week period is when we should get a letter confirming how much we should expect to get in terms of funding. And then after that is when we work to get that funding into our bank and complete the contracts and execute the building contract and so forth. In terms of the government expanding the time period, which is a question that's been asked here, it's something that we're looking into. A set of solicitors was appointed to review legal recovery at the scheme. That's obviously changed with the laws are looking to be adapted. We're keeping a very close eye on that, and if there is an opportunity for any legal recovery against anyone, be assured that the freeholder is going to be looking at that. So a question here is around the balconies and what will happen with them. The actual fire report at the moment, because of the way that the balconies are set at at Cartier House, the thoughts from the fire engineers are that the spread would be low and slow effectively, so it wouldn't spread from balcony to balcony as it would on a vertically stacked building. I think there's concern about the balconies at the front of Cartier House. We're doing a bit of research into that, and the architects are looking and doing some measurements on how that will actually react in a fire. I don't know if you've seen Clarence House, which is just over the road, which has got the same type of structure from the front of the tower. The fire engineer's view on Clarence was that the spread would be slow and not very progressive, and that it would be therefore not a requirement to replace them. That's kind of the thought path that's going on at Cartier. They're doing them calculations now. We're understanding that. Once we know the outcome of that, the contractor is able to price it into the schedule as a non-eligible cost, but we're waiting to understand what the fire engineer's view is on this. And we should say, by the way, when we talk about the fire engineer at this scheme, we've actually been working with 2 fire engineers on this just to verify the information from both of them. We obviously understand that in 5 years' time, we have to come back and get another EWS1. They have to be reviewed every 5 years by a fire engineer. We don't just want to take one fire engineer as be all for that. So we've been working with 2 fire engineers, providing information between the 2 of them to make sure that they're both on the same page, one from a leading organisation and one from another leading organisation. So yeah, I hope that kind of gives some. So our question here is that on another scheme, we was able to perform tests to show that no remediation work was required. Have we performed the same test? And if so, what were the results? And if not, why not? Yes, we have. The fire engineer has provided a risk-based approach. The fire engineers looked at the level of risk at the building and deemed that remediation is required. Once we do that, we're able to dive into it a little bit more. The other scheme that you're talking about only had a low level of risk because of the area and the height of that particular block that was attached to the building. It was only a 5-story block attached to an 18-story tower, as you're aware. So yeah, the fire engineer has looked at this to see if remediation is definitely required, and that so forth. So question here, sorry, I'm just flicking through these as we go. Sorry about this, guys, I'm just having to look at these. In terms of a question here saying someone's a bit confused, is there going to be non-eligible costs or not? At the moment, we're anticipating £40,000, and that is the only non-eligible cost that we're aware of. We're not aware of any other non-eligible costs at the minute, but it'll be down to the ministry to finalise that to us once we submit the stage 2. A question here about the balconies. Expand on that a little bit more. Why wasn't it considered early? If works are required, would it not be better to include it in this programme of works? Yes, no, exactly that. So the original view was that the balcony work wasn't required because of the way that they were set back, and it was only on the front of the building. There was a concern about that because of how easy it's expected to be to do that work in the project. It has fallen down the pecking order a little bit, but not too much. So the team have been doing them calculations. They're confident in that approach. There was some concern at first about having to replace them, but at the moment the view of the team is that it's not required, but they're just confirming that up. And as I say, we've got 2 fire engineers that are working to clarify that for us so that we can make sure we make the best decision based on a risk approach. The contractor himself is already, as part of the repricing, has included the balconies, just because I wanted to know the cost of how much it will cost to replace the balconies of concern. But there is thought, and we need to come back to site to look at this, and there's a bit of a debate going on at the moment on if we should come to site or if we should just get up there and look at this when we actually start the project. But there is consideration into the fact that the balconies at the front may have to come down anyway, purely because when we scaffold and we have to get into that front elevation to input fire cavity barriers, that the balconies are structurally in as part of the structure of the front elevation. So the architects are looking at that, and there's thought that we may have to return and do a bit of an intrusive look into that. But my view is, if we find out the cost, we know how much that front elevation is going to cost in terms of balconies, that we should consider that in our approach, that we should maybe move forward, get the scaffold up there, and then do that approach of looking and seeing if that's what we need to do, if that methodology needs to change, be prepared to change it and be able to react quickly, replacing them balconies and going for a variation. But that is obviously a risk-based approach based on the price that the contractor gives us for replacing them balconies. In terms of reclaiming everything through the service charge, how is that going to work? So at the moment, the thought process is, as you all know, the budget for lead stock is due out by the end of this month. It may be slightly delayed. I'm not going to beat around that. The reason being that it's delayed on Cartier and the other cladding projects here is there's going to be a separate schedule where we're going to put all these costs in. What will happen is that will not be charged out, and I want to make that perfectly clear. That won't be charged out. There'll be It'll be included on a demand run, and you'll get to see it there, but you won't be charged, you won't be chased, and there'll be no requirement for you to make that payment at any point. We've just got to do that because we've got to include it in the budget. What will then happen is, say that the Building Safety Fund application is successful, we then get that allocation per flat. We'll make that payment will come in, and we'll assign it to your account, crossing off basically the charge that we'd raised as part of the budget. It's all going to be in a separate schedule. That is the current thought process of how this has to be completed. We obviously still have to complete the next step of the Section 20, which we're looking to do. The Stage 2 of the Section 20 will be shared once we submit once we submit that Stage 2 application, and we're a few weeks in and we have an understanding of how much is going to be covered, we'll share that second stage of the Section 20 with you, along with a cover letter explaining what information we've got from MHLGC at this time. So I hope that gives a bit of background on that. A question here is around the other costs, and if there's any opportunity to expand on that. Certainly, we're going to share some information on this. When we say other costs, that was just the heading. Underneath that, it's got lots of subheadings that we're going to share some information on. We're able to actually provide quite a lot of detail, per square meter on the building on that heading, which will come into a great bit of use when we're going through the costs. And as we've said, we're hopeful that we're probably going to be in a position to be able to share the cost assessors report, so people such as yourself as a leaseholder can feel confident in the approach and the tender that the project team have gathered. Question here saying when we have an answer on the balconies. The team are working on that. As I said, the answer, as far as I'm aware, is there. They're just doing the recalculations. They're just checking that they're happy with that. They're happy for the balconies to remain in place. The second fire engineer is taking a look. He's giving off his opinion, which is due in this week. And once we have that, we're able to say, right, yeah, we're happy with the fire engineer's approach. The balconies don't need to be replaced. However, as I said, there's still discussions going that they may be replaced anyway on the front elevation because they're so structurally integral to the building that we'll have to do it in order to do the work, at which point they would be included in the BSF fund. The government will pay for balconies that are structurally integral. So I understand that you want to understand the risk there, and that's entirely why we're having to do not only a double check, but then passing it to another fire engineer to be completely happy that the risk there has been calculated properly. Because the last thing we want is to make a wrong decision here, and we have to be happy with the next steps. In terms of the waking watch cost, so as you all know, the fire alarm has been installed. The site team, myself, and our suppliers worked very hard to get that in as quickly as possible. In terms of the cost, they're going to be not included in next year's budget, as we mentioned, and we are doing a final drawdown of that fund as part of the year-end accounts, which will then give a balancing adjustment on that cost for the waking watch and be able to finalise and get rid of that charge altogether. So I hope that gives a bit of background on the waking watch cost. In terms of the question here asking when will all the works be finished, the key there is that once we get submitted, that 8-week, that 52-week, and you would hope, the quicker that progresses, if we get into the fund by the end of this year, then you would be hoping that by the end of next year, pushing early the year after, that we'll be finally in a position that this situation is resolved and this project's completed. We'll keep you updated on that. As soon as we know we're allowed to submit, we're going to share the timeline. We have to submit that as part of the application, so we'll have the timeline. We're going to share that out to everyone, and then at least it sets them milestones that people will be expecting us to hit, and people will be able to understand where we are in the project, and we can keep you updated on that. So I hope that kind of helps with that one. I do hope it is I hope that does provide some background on that. So a question here is about how will it be on site? Lots of people work from home these days. A quiet office environment is quite kind of key. I understand that. and the team are going to be working very hard to minimise any impact on residents. The estate team are also very involved in this discussion. One of the reasons being, as you all know, there's probably a TV studio on site that's going to be operating throughout duration of this project, and there's got to be consideration into the vibration as well as the noise that will actually be caused. That's one of the things that we're negotiating with them to understand their requirements with that. In terms of the actual residents, as I say, we'll do our very best to minimise any impact. We'll keep everyone updated if we know there's going to be certain situations where there is impact. I'm not going to sit here and say it's going to be perfect, because it's going to be a building site. There's going to be noise. There's going to be machinery and scaffolding and stuff on site. It will only be operating on the hours that it's allowed and standard hours. And I can't give too much background into that, because until we know how intrusive it's going to be, I'm not really sure. All I know is the discussions around the project at the moment, and with the project team, with the supplier, with Homes England, with MHLGC, and all the various parties involved in this, is that there isn't a requirement to decamp and to move residents out, and that the premises will remain habitable and be able to be occupied by residents. So I think I've made my way through most of the questions. I know there might be one or two in there that I've missed, which is because I probably don't know the answer on them. So we'll pick them up, we'll respond to your email directly, and we'll probably include a little bit of information in the newsletter, which is due out this week, which we're in the process of finalising that draft on. And as I've said, probably over the next month or so, we're probably going to share a few more newsletters so that we're able to present as we progress what's happening over the next couple of weeks, because I know it's very key to leaseholders to be able to understand that. So I hope that gives you the background. Nothing else has come through. If anybody does have any questions, do email that email address. Myself or one of my team will pick that up. We do have a building safety team now at Live, where we're recruiting, and we've already got our first member that's joined. So between us, communication will start to move quicker, and between as that team expands, we're working very hard to keep that level of communication with leaseholders going. So I am going to look to end roughly around after 40 minutes. I do appreciate everyone joining tonight. As I say, do drop an email to that email if you've got any questions that I've not answered over the next few days. And I appreciate everyone coming on the call, and I look forward to any feedback. Many thanks, guys.